Thank you for coming along today. First, want to read the names of the people killed. Harry Conlon was 54 when he was murdered. Aidan Wallace was 22 when he was murdered. Christy Docherty was 51 when he was murdered. Joseph Duffin was 66 when he was murdered. Peter McGee was 18 when he was murdered. Willie McManus was 54. James Kennedy was 15. Mickey Gilbride was 36. Martin Moran was 22, Teresa Clinton was 34, and Laurie Brennan was 51. Today is an emotional day. It's been a difficult couple of days for the families and the survivors in terms of getting to grips with the report and reading the damning report in the egregious nature of it. Families hold their loved ones close, and it's also the Wallace family would like me to say that Aidan, even though he's dead, has become a grandfather more recently with the birth of a young son, Agilus. This report lays bare some of the most unimaginable and egregious actions that effectively constitutes the wholesale running of a terror death squad in this small part of our city by our UC Special Branch. What is missing from this report are the roles of the British Army's Force Research Unit and the Security Service MI5. The investigations of these agencies is beyond the powers of the Police Ombudsman, but we know the agents that were involved, some of them worked across the range of these three agencies: Special Branch, MI5 and Force Research Unit. This report has touched upon 27 murders and attempted murders. 8 of the agents involved with the UDA were involved in these murders, paid for by the Special Branch and other agencies they were working for, including MI5 and the FRU. Although this report is limited to the 11 murders, an issue that we raised with the Ombudsman, she has cited that she doesn't have the resources to take on a comprehensive investigation that would encompass the 27 murders. And the time period that we're looking at, in those first couple of years, from 1990 to 92 and into the early 90s, 50 murders were carried out involving this same unit of the UDA across this city, involving these same agents. There was a failure to warn people, particularly Jim Clinton, Harry Conlon and Sam Caskey. The murder of Teresa Clinton may well have been prevented had Jim Clinton been told that on 3 separate occasions he was being targeted and that a senior RUC officer made the decision not to warn him. There was the provision of live weapons to the killers and the provisions of weapons to the killers, and in particular to an agent that the Special Branch knew had the ability to reactivate these weapons. There were countless opportunities to seize weapons and other items of key forensic and ballistic value, yet the decisions to withhold or not pass this information on or to destroy it were also taken. This constitutes, for clarity, an irrefutable systemic policy of collusion across our city. Make no doubt about that. The Ombudsman is using the term because there has been so many attempts to thwart her activities during the course of the publication of this report and other reports, along with previous Ombudsmen. Vexatious applications to the Belfast High Court by the very people that are the subject of the Ombudsman's investigations, former members of Special Branch, have sought to tie her hands behind her back and to gag her. The PSNI have also been instrumental in withholding information, and the Chief Constable has acted in the context of this report, in our view, to use public interest immunity at the behest of the other 2 agencies that were running these murder gangs too. This was not just the Special Branch, it's one part of the jigsaw, one part of the puzzle. MI5 and Force Research Unit were centrally involved in this issue as well, and that needs to be examined too. I'm now going to hand over to Niall Murphy of KRW Law.
This report represents a further chapter in what now must be considered a state policy of collusion. This report lays bare the architecture of that policy. This report cannot be read in a vacuum today. It must be considered in the context of other reports. The well-worn defence of it was just a few bad apples, doesn't work anymore. This report and other reports prove that the orchard was stinking. We know that collusion was a systemic policy in South Down, North, South and West Belfast, South and North Derry, North Antrim and Mid-Ulster, different police districts at different times, with different informers, with different handlers, with different weapons, different killers, different UDR barracks, but the same policy. The blueprint remained the same, and that is now evidenced in this report. The report proves, and I quote, that police prioritised intelligence gathering and the protection of sources over the detection of serious crime and their obligation to bring perpetrators of those crimes to justice. Listen to that quote and ask yourself, was this a normal society? The evidence is now undeniable. We have had a series of reports from Lord Stevens, Sir Desmond de Silva, Nuala Lone, Dr. Michael Maguire, Marie Anderson now. Language is very important on a day like today. We hear control, oversight, management, but that needs to be set beside the facts that are reported in today's report. The British Army donated the handgun that was used to murder Aidan Wallace and was used in the bookmakers. The VZ-58 which was used was imported by the MOD from South Africa. Its importation was resourced and supervised to ensure that the lethality of Loyalist organisations was trebled. A weapon was donated directly from a British Army armoury at the Malone Road. The weapon used to murder Theresa Clinton was an RUC personal protection weapon. When the weapons were recovered, they were handed back to the UDA. Marie Anderson finds, and I quote again, "As an objective independent observer, I find it inherently reckless to provide a live weapon to a terrorist in any circumstance. I consider the term reckless to denote conduct that is characterised by the creation of a substantial and unjustifiable risk of harm to others." But that's not the end of the story, because weapons were then donated as grotesque, macabre trophies to the Imperial War Museum in London. Many suspects were never arrested. Person U, who is named as a key suspect in the murders at the bookmakers and of Aidan Wallace and Harry Conlon, was never arrested for the bookmakers or for Harry Conlon. Marie Anderson states in paragraph 12.101, "The omissions identified in my investigation on the part of the police that relate to person U cause me concern. It's my view there was sufficient evidence to justify the arrest of person U, and yet this was not done." When suspects were arrested, the most cursory of police work was not conducted. Alibis weren't even checked. This is in circumstances where accounts provided did not even tally with each other. Witnesses did come forward. Witnesses did give names as to who they seen running out of the bookies. But when they were asked to attend ID parades, their names and addresses were read out to the suspects. They weren't given screens for ID parades. They were expected for confrontation IDs. These failings also happened in the investigation to the murder of Theresa Clinton. Threats were not passed on in the case of Theresa Clinton, and Marie Anderson finds at 8108 that police did not communicate a real and imminent threat, and that may have impacted on the preventability of the murder of Mrs. Clinton. As I say, witnesses did come forward, wanted to cooperate with police, but it's lamentable, in the least, that senior investigating officers in the murders at the bookmakers of Michael Kilbride and Martin Moran did not cooperate with the Ombudsman's investigation. These reports must also be considered in the context of the British Government's current legacy proposals. There can be no doubt that the intention of those proposals is to ensure that reports like today are never published again. The British Government are attempting an immunity so wide-ranging that it would have made Pinochet blush in Chile. This report must be considered a catalyst and a clarion call to ensure that these proposals never become law.
Thank you. Now, I'm now going to ask some of the families to speak directly to you. I'm going to start with Niall Conlon. Niall, have you a short statement you'd like to make?
Thanks for the opportunity to speak on behalf of my mum and my brothers. It's over 30 years since Harry Conlon, a much-loved husband and father, was brutally and callously taken from us in a random sectarian murder. Harry's sole purpose in life was to provide for his family. He was deprived from doing this, and we were deprived of his love. It's now nearly 15 years since we instigated our complaint to the Police Ombudsman. We're thankful to have finally received her report and for the significant work undertaken by the Ombudsman's office in this regard, the findings of which are shocking and point to serious investigative failings, amongst which are serious failings in forensic strategies employed and in the dissemination of vital intelligence to the investigating police from Special Branch, failure to search houses, failure to question suspects where there were clear links to the murder, and failure to act on pre-intelligence information of a planned and dated UDA attack. That said, no findings, however stark, can bring my father back. Nothing can change the heartbreak we have lived with over these years. My brothers and I will be forever indebted to our mother, Josephine, who, despite the tragic loss, has shown strength and guidance to myself and my brothers over the intervening years. This dignity stands in stark contrast to the actions and inactions of those involved in my father's death. Thank you.
Thank you, Niall. Now I'd like Mark Sykes to address the media.
Obviously, the families have only had a number of hours to digest the content of this report, and some of the stark issues in it relate to weapons, intelligence and informers. In relation to Sean Grahams Bookmakers, it is common knowledge now that the weapon had been taken from Malone UDR base by Ken Barrett, who was instructed to go into Malone UDR base by Special Branch handler RO6. That weapon was then handed to Billy Stobie. Billy Stobie then handed to his UDR, or RUC handlers, and they claimed to have deactivated that weapon and returned it to a Loyalist death squad. The weapon was then used on the 21st of December 1981 to murder Aidan Wallace. At that stage, the RUC must have been aware that a weapon that they had in their possession that they've given to the UDA was now reactivated. I listened to Marie Anderson this morning, and I think she said that this happened in around 50 occasions where deactivated weapons were handed back to UDA. All those weapons had been reactivated. So in all sense, that the RUC and Special Branch were handing back weapons to a Loyalist death squad to murder our loved ones. This is totally wrong and totally unjustifiable, and someone needs to be held to account for it. It also says in the report that around 8 UDA informants were involved in 27 murders. What I have taken from that is that the RUC Special Branch recruited informants not to prevent murder, but to perfect murder. And this is exactly what has happened to our loved ones. Our loved ones were murdered by a UDA death squad supplied with weapons from the RUC. It's disgraceful, and people need to be held to account for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I'd now like to ask Kerry Gilbride to read a short statement.
The most shocking thing to us as a family, the senior investigating officer, the man responsible for investigating my father's death, refused to cooperate with the Police Ombudsman investigation. I want to know why, what happened to her.
Thank you, Kerry. Like that, I'd call him Billy McManus.
Hi, my father Willie was one of the ones killed in Sean Grahams Bookies. And this report is damning, but it gives you more questions than it does answers. I know other family members here, so I will keep it short. What went on in the South Belfast at the hands of Loyalist death squads, being protected by the police so they could come into South Belfast, into Sean Grahams Bookies and drive away without being challenged is sickening. And what I have read in the report, that is systematic, that the police and special branch and the MI5, whatever you want to call them, destroyed evidence that could lead to the killers being convicted as Sean Grahams bookmakers and on other murders in South Belfast. And what we have learned from this report and the disclosure that we got in the civil case, I could name the 3 people involved in Sean Grahams bookmakers. And if we can work it out who pulled the trigger and who drove the car, Simon Byrne and the PSNI must know. Why 30 years later are they still protecting these loyalist death squads? And what is the PSNI going to do about it? Thank you.
Thank you, Billy. And I'll ask Siobhan Clinton to say a few words.
The report itself reads shocking from start to finish. Our family's name is mentioned 104 times throughout this report. On 4 occasions, the RUC didn't inform our family that they were under threat. They had information as early as 2 weeks before my mummy was murdered around these threats. The Ombudsman stated that if our family had have been informed of the imminent threat, that this could have prevented my mummy's murder. The RUC deliberately ruined an ID parade. The names and addresses of the suspects were read out in front of them. They understandably left the police station in fear of their lives. There are numerous points throughout this report, but the most shocking are the weapon used to murder my mummy was an RUC-issued gun, and the officer who owned the gun refused to cooperate with this report. In the words of the Ombudsman, I am of the view that this is a serious admission, constitutes collusive behaviour. Thank you.
Thank you, Siobhan. I'd now like to ask Bosco Kennedy, the brother of James Kennedy, to say a few words.
I'd just like to say that today is all about the families and the victims. We've been waiting over 30 years for this report. From a personal point of view, the simple facts that I take from this report: the Loyalist murders who carried out the Sean Grahams bookmakers atrocity were police informants, and one of the guns used to murder my 15-year-old brother was given to the UDA by the RUC police handlers. Today we get the truth, but we still want justice, and we don't want justice for the ones who carried out the atrocity. We want justice for their handlers. We want to know who put the guns in those Loyalist murderers' hands. Thank you.
Thank you, boss. And finally, I'd like to call on Tommy Duffin, the son of Jack Duffin.
We're here, obviously, for the 30th anniversary and obviously about this report. The report was quite damning in the RUC and quite so. Should have been more damning in my personal opinion. This is only the end of a chapter for us. I think the new chapter begins when we start hunting down perpetrators and also their handlers. This has to happen. So we have to get some way of a mechanism to bring these people to justice. So far, I think some nice takes. Thanks.
This is collusion, make no mistake about it, and it's part of an overarching strategy of the British government that was implemented. Remember, at the time of these murders, MI5, Security Service, Force Research Unit and Special Branch were meeting twice weekly in the Tasking and Coordinating Group in Stormont Castle. They were meeting and getting this information that were coming from those 8 agents. So be under no illusion. They knew at every level of the establishment, and yet it was permitted. Thank you.